The forest holds secrets darker than its deepest shadows. For 30 years, Ranger Daniel Hayes had seen it all. Lost hikers, deadly storms, and wildlife encounters gone wrong. But nothing prepared him for what he discovered that fateful October night. The search for 5-year-old Eli Turner was supposed to be routine, tragic but familiar. Instead, it became the case that would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. As rain hammered the forest canopy and lightning split the sky, Daniel fought through the storm, following tracks no other ranger could see. When he finally found the boy clutching a fallen log in raging waters, relief quickly turned to dread. What exactly had been out there with the child for 3 days? And why did the strange markings carved into nearby trees match symbols from unsolved disappearances dating back 50 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October wind rattled the windows of Daniel Hayes' cabin as he packed his gear methodically. First aid kit, extra thermal blankets, 3 days of provisions. At 58, Daniel had spent more of his life in these woods than out of them. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, each item finding its proper place in the backpack. The call had come just as he was brewing his morning coffee. A child missing for nearly 3 days in the northern section. Most rangers would call it a recovery mission by now, not a rescue. Daniel knew the odds too well. "Hayes speaking," he'd answered, voice gravelly from disuse. "Daniel, it's Susan." The station chief rarely called directly unless the situation was dire. 5-year-old boy. "Turner family. Their campsite is near Blackwater Ridge." Daniel paused at the name. Blackwater Ridge had a reputation among the old-timers. Storms hitting their hardest. Search teams? Called off. Deputy Collins made the call an hour ago. Daniel's jaw tightened. Collins never did have the stomach for difficult searches. "I'm going." "Figured you'd say that," Susan replied. "Radio check every hour. Don't make me send someone after you, too." The cabin walls held the silence of a man who lived alone by choice. 15 years since Sarah's disappearance in those same woods. The official report said she'd fallen into a ravine during a hike. Her body was never recovered. Daniel zipped his pack and reached for the worn journal on his bedside table. Its leather cover bore the marks of rain, sun, and time. Inside, 3 decades of observations, sketches of tracks, notes on weather patterns, and things most rangers would never think to record. He thumbed to a blank page and made a simple entry. October 17th, search for boy, Eli T., Blackwater Ridge. Below it, almost unconsciously, he added, near Site 7. Site 7 was his private designation for where Sarah had vanished. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mike Barnes stood on the porch, the junior ranger shifting nervously from foot to foot. Susan radioed. "Said you might need these." Mike handed over a stack of laminated maps. "Latest satellite imagery before the storm." "Thanks." Daniel took them with a nod. "The boy's been out there 3 nights." "Daniel," Mike's voice held the tentative concern of youth addressing experience. "With the wolves and the temperature drop, I've seen stranger things." Daniel shouldered his pack. "Radio might cut out with the storm. Don't worry unless you haven't heard from me by Thursday." Mike nodded, unconvinced. "What makes you think you can find him when the full team couldn't?" Daniel paused at the doorway, eyes drifting to the dense tree line beyond his cabin. "Because I know what others miss." He tapped his temple. "The forest speaks if you know how to listen." Driving toward Blackwater Ridge, Daniel's truck radio crackled with the emergency broadcast. The storm was intensifying. He passed the main ranger station, where Susan stood on the steps, arms crossed. Their eyes met briefly as he drove by. No wave, just mutual understanding. The road narrowed, civilization receding in his rearview mirror. Daniel's mind wandered to the Turner boy. Children who survived alone in these woods were rare. Those who did often spoke of imaginary friends who helped them. Old Man Thomas from the reservation once told him that children sometimes see what adults cannot. The first heavy raindrops hit his windshield as Daniel reached the trailhead. The forest beyond was already a wall of shadows, trees swaying violently in the wind. He secured his ranger hat and stepped into the downpour, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Something about this search felt different. The location, the storm, the child's age. He patted the pocket where his journal rested, thinking of similar notes made years ago when Sarah had still been by his side. "I'm coming, boy," he muttered to the howling forest. "Just hold on a little longer." Behind him, his truck disappeared into the mist as he entered the tree line. Following tracks only he could see, the Turners' campsite bore the frantic energy of parents whose world had collapsed. Yellow police tape fluttered uselessly in the wind. Rain had washed away most evidence days ago, but Daniel moved methodically, seeing what others had missed. Sarah Turner huddled under the camp awning, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Her husband Robert paced nearby, talking too loudly on a satellite phone that barely functioned in the storm. "They called off the search," Sarah said when she noticed Daniel. Her voice was flat, drained of hope. "Said no child could survive 3 nights in this weather." "Mrs. Turner, I'm Ranger Hayes." Daniel crouched to her eye level, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not giving up on your boy." Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Where were you 3 days ago?" "When it mattered." Robert ended his call, approaching with the defensive posture of a man who'd been answering difficult questions for days. "Sarah, please." "The ranger's trying to help." He extended his hand to Daniel. "Robert Turner, we have a vacation property about 20 miles south." This was supposed to be Eli's first real camping trip. Daniel nodded, noting the expensive boots and pristine outdoor gear. "City people playing at wilderness." "Tell me about the day he disappeared," Daniel said, scanning the campsite perimeter. Robert sighed. "We were setting up the tent. Eli was right here, coloring in his book. I turned around to hammer a stake and he was gone. Not even 5 minutes. "He's been talking about a friend in the trees," said a young voice. Daniel turned to see a teenage girl emerging from the family's SUV, dark circles under intelligent eyes. "Maya Turner, 14, according to the case notes." "Maya, not now," Robert warned. "Dad, it's important." The girl approached, defiant. Eli kept saying someone was watching him from the woods. "You both said it was his imagination." Sarah made a choked sound. "He's always had imaginary friends." Daniel studied the girl. "When did he start talking about this particular friend?" "The second day we got here," Maya said. "He called it the tall man who whispers." Robert's face flushed. "For God's sake, Maya." Ranger Hayes doesn't need to hear about Eli's stories, but Daniel was already processing this detail. "Did Eli wander off at all before he disappeared?" "Even briefly." The parents exchanged glances. "He did get lost for about 20 minutes the day before," Sarah admitted. "But he just followed a squirrel," he said. "When he came back, he had this." Maya held out a smooth black stone. Said his friend gave it to him. Robert snatched it from her hand. "It's just a river rock. This isn't helping find Eli." Daniel made a mental note about the stone. "May I see where you found his jacket?" They walked 50 yards to a towering pine. The small red jacket hung from a branch nearly 15 feet up, swaying in the wind like a flag of surrender. "The search team spotted it yesterday," Robert explained. "They used a pole to get it down, then put it back for evidence photos." Daniel frowned. "No 5-year-old could climb this tree." "That's what I said," Maya murmured. Daniel circled the tree, finding what he sought, unusual scrape marks on the bark. Not from human nails or common wildlife. "Did the search teams check north of the river?" he asked. "They said it was impossible for him to cross," Sarah replied. "The current's too strong," Daniel nodded, studying the ground. Beneath the pine, partially hidden by wet leaves, he spotted something. He knelt and picked up a small wooden carving, a fox, half-finished. "That's Robert's," Sarah said softly. "He's been carving it for Eli." Robert looked embarrassed. "Trying to do something outdoorsy." "I'm not very good." Daniel turned the carving over in his hand. The craftsmanship was surprisingly good for an amateur. "Mind if I borrow this?" Children sometimes follow familiar objects. Before Robert could object, a park service vehicle pulled up. Deputy Collins stepped out, looking annoyed to see Daniel. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you here," Collins said tightly. "We're moving this family to town. Storm's getting worse." I need more time with them, Daniel insisted. You need to clear the area, Collins countered. We'll recover the body when weather permits. Sarah let out a small cry. Daniel noticed Maya slipping something into his pocket, the black stone her brother had found. I'll find him, Daniel promised quietly as the family was ushered away. In the gathering darkness, he turned to face the wilderness beyond the campsite, the wooden fox carving secure in his hand. The rain intensified, washing away footprints, but not the sense that something unusual waited in the forest depths. The rain hammered relentlessly as Daniel made his way to the eastern reservation. His truck struggled on the muddy road that few outsiders ever traveled. By the time he reached Elder Thomas's cabin, darkness had fully settled over the forest. Thomas stood waiting on his porch as if he'd known Daniel would come. At 83, the tribal elder moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime observing the rhythms of the natural world. "You're going after the lost boy," Thomas said. "Not a question, but a statement. Need your eyes on something first." Daniel showed him the rubbings he'd made of the marks on the tree near where Eli's jacket was found. Thomas's weathered face grew still. He invited Daniel inside with a silent gesture. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. Thomas studied the markings under the yellow light of an oil lamp, his fingers tracing the patterns on the paper. "When I was a boy," he said finally, "my grandfather forbade us from playing in certain parts of the forest. He called them thin places where unwanted things could cross over." "What kind of things?" Daniel asked. Thomas reached for an ancient map spread on his table, its edges crumbling with age. "Our people have many stories about a being that takes those who wander too deep. The settlers who came later had their own names for it." He pointed to areas marked with symbols similar to those Daniel had found. These boundaries were never crossed. Not for hunting, not for gathering, especially when children were present, Daniel frowned. "This region includes Blackwater Ridge. The boy is there." Thomas looked troubled. His family was camping at the edge. "Search teams have already given up," Thomas nodded slowly. "They are wise to fear, but wrong to abandon the child." He moved to a wooden chest in the corner, retrieving something small wrapped in soft leather. "My grandfather gave me this. Said it was carved from the antler of a white stag that could walk between worlds." He unwrapped a small whistle, yellowed with age, intricate symbols carved into its surface. "Blow this only in greatest need. It calls to those who listen to the spaces between trees." Thomas pressed it into Daniel's palm. "Some might help, others—" He left the thought unfinished. Daniel tucked the whistle into his breast pocket. "The boy mentioned a tall man who whispers. Does that mean something to you?" Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "There are old stories, a collector of lost souls. It appears differently to each person, but children often see it most clearly." He paused. "Before they are taken. Taken where?" Daniel asked. "Some say to a place beneath the roots of the oldest trees. A place between this world and others." Thomas studied Daniel's face. "Your wife. You never found her," Daniel stiffened. "This isn't about Sarah, isn't it? 15 years searching these forests, taking every lost person case." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "You seek answers in each rescue." "I'm doing my job," Daniel said tersely. "The places on this map," Thomas continued as if Daniel hadn't spoken, "they form a pattern. Your wife disappeared here," he pointed to a location. "And now the boy is missing here." His finger moved to Blackwater Ridge. 7 years apart, Daniel frowned. "What are you saying?" "Patterns matter in the deep forest. Time cycles. 7 years, 14, 21. Thomas rolled up the map. "Take this. It shows paths the Park Service maps don't." As Daniel turned to leave, Thomas caught his arm. "If you find the boy, be careful what follows you home." Outside, the storm seemed to pause momentarily, an unnatural stillness settling over the reservation. Daniel stowed the map in his pack and headed back to his truck. In the rearview mirror, he saw Thomas watching from the porch, a solitary figure framed against the warm light of his cabin. The elder raised his hand in what might have been a blessing or a warning. As Daniel drove toward Blackwater Ridge, the storm resumed with renewed fury. The trees alongside the road bent nearly horizontal in the wind. Through sheets of rain, he could swear he saw unnaturally tall shadows moving between the trunks. The antler whistle seemed to grow heavier in his pocket. An old man's superstition, he told himself. Nothing more. But as he neared the trailhead where his search would begin at dawn, doubt crept in like the dampness that penetrated his clothes. Dawn broke reluctantly through the storm clouds as Daniel began his methodical search. Rain had turned the forest floor into a treacherous bog, erasing most signs of passage. But Daniel saw what others couldn't: a broken spider web at child height, moss displaced on a fallen log, the subtle compression of pine needles. He set up his first trail camera at a junction where animal paths converged, angling it toward what looked like a small footprint half filled with rainwater. The camera was old technology. Most rangers had upgraded years ago, but Daniel trusted its reliability in harsh conditions. "Command post, this is Hayes," he spoke into his radio, getting only bursts of static in return. The storm was interfering with communications. He'd try again from higher ground. By midday, Daniel had established a search grid focusing northward, contrary to what the official teams had done. They'd assumed no child would head uphill into rougher terrain. But Daniel knew that lost people rarely behaved logically. Fear made them climb, seeking vantage points that only led them deeper into wilderness. He paused to check Thomas's map against his GPS. According to the tribal markings, he was approaching one of the thin places. The rational part of his mind dismissed the superstition, but 30 years in these forests had taught him to respect local knowledge. Something rustled in the underbrush ahead. Daniel froze, listening intently. Not a deer or bear. The movement was too deliberate, too careful. He drew his sidearm, advancing slowly. The rustling stopped. The forest fell unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of raindrops hitting leaves though the storm continued. "Eli?" Daniel called. "Eli Turner." His voice seemed muffled, as if the air itself absorbed the sound. 20 yards ahead, he spotted a clearing he didn't remember from his maps. As he approached, he noticed the vegetation formed an almost perfect circle, with a massive oak at its center. The oak was ancient, its trunk wider than any Daniel had documented in this forest. More disturbing were the markings carved into its bark, symbols matching those from the tree where Eli's jacket was found. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking, came from behind him. Daniel spun, seeing nothing but shadows between trees. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be, some appearing almost vertical, like slender pillars. His radio crackled suddenly. "Repeat, Asian, come in." "This is Hayes," he responded. "Signal breaking up. I found signs heading north toward Blackwater Creek. Teams called dangerous. Return." The transmission dissolved into static. Daniel knew Susan was ordering him back. The smart play was to return, wait out the storm, resume with backup. Instead, he pressed forward, following a trail only he could see. By late afternoon, Daniel reached a ridgeline overlooking a steep ravine. The creek below had swollen to a raging river that would be impossible to cross. If Eli had come this way, he'd have been forced to follow the ridgeline east or west. Daniel noticed something caught in the branches of a fallen pine, a scrap of blue fabric that matched the description of Eli's pajamas. The fabric was at least 2 days old, stiff with dried mud, but protected from the rain by the dense branches. As he catalogued the find in his notebook, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the ravine, just within the tree line, stood a figure. Daniel raised his binoculars. The distance and rain made it difficult to see clearly, but the figure appeared tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing. Not a search team member, they wore bright orange vests. "Hello?" He called over the roar of the water. The figure didn't respond, but seemed to retreat slowly into the trees without turning around. Daniel scrambled along the ridgeline, seeking a safe crossing point. The map showed an old logging bridge 2 miles east. It would mean backtracking, but it was the only viable option before nightfall. As the daylight faded, Daniel made a difficult decision. He would make camp, continue at first light. Setting up his small tent in the shelter of a rock outcropping, he tried the radio again. This time, complete silence greeted him. He placed the second trail camera facing the ravine, hoping to capture any movement during the night. As darkness enveloped the forest, the rain finally stopped. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the storm had been. In that silence, Daniel could have sworn he heard a child's laughter, distant and echoing, coming from across the ravine. First light revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had passed, but left the forest glistening and dangerous. Tree limbs had fallen across Daniel's intended path, forcing him to find alternate routes. The swollen creek had become a roaring torrent that tore at its banks. Daniel checked his trail camera before breaking camp. The memory card showed nothing until 3:17 a.m., a frame with a dark, elongated shape at the edge. The next image was blank, as if something had disabled the camera. Following the ridgeline east, Daniel located the old logging bridge, or what remained of it. Half the structure had collapsed into the churning water below. Only a few slick wooden planks remained, creating a treacherous crossing. His radio squawked unexpectedly. "Hayes, do you copy? Your location?" Susan's voice cut through before dissolving back into static. "Crossing Blackwater Creek," he replied, doubting the transmission would reach her. "Following signs of the Turner boy." No response came. Daniel secured his pack and began the dangerous crossing. The wind gusted as he reached the midpoint, nearly toppling him into the current. One hand gripped a frayed guide rope as his feet struggled for purchase on the wet wood. Below, the rushing water seemed almost alive, reaching up with white fingers of foam. For a moment, Daniel could have sworn he saw faces in the rapids, open mouths calling silently. He forced himself forward, refusing to look down again. 3/4 across, a board snapped beneath his foot. Daniel lunged for the far side, landing hard on the opposite bank as the broken piece tumbled into the water. Looking back, he realized returning the same way would be impossible. A glint caught his eye, something reflective in the mud near the river's edge. Daniel knelt to examine it. A child's pair of eyeglasses, bent but intact. Too small for Eli Turner, who didn't wear glasses according to his file. These were older, with thick plastic frames, in a style not worn for decades. Daniel carefully placed them in an evidence bag, noting their unusual condition. Despite appearing vintage, the lenses were unscratched, as if preserved somehow from the elements. The ground here held clearer tracks, small footprints accompanied by another set, unnaturally long and narrow. Daniel photographed them before they could deteriorate further, following the trail deeper into the forest. Daniel noticed how the trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably. His breath fogged in the sudden chill. "Eli?" he called, voice echoing strangely. "Eli Turner?" A rustling came from ahead. Daniel quickened his pace, pushing through dense underbrush until he reached another clearing. Unlike the natural formation he'd found earlier, this one appeared deliberately made. Trees had been broken at identical heights, their trunks snapped rather than cut, forming a rough circle. At the center lay a child's shoe, red with a light-up heel, one of Eli's, matching the description in the report. Daniel approached cautiously, scanning for signs of disturbance. The shoe appeared carefully placed, not dropped in flight. A deliberate marker, or a lure. He photographed it before picking it up, noting it was completely dry despite the recent storm. The light still blinked when he tapped the heel. A sharp crack from the trees made Daniel spin around, hand moving to his sidearm. Between two ancient pines stood a small figure. "Eli," Daniel called softly. The child, it was definitely a child, didn't respond, but turned and walked deeper into the forest with unhurried steps. Daniel followed, calling out reassurances as he navigated the dense vegetation. The small figure remained just ahead, visible in glimpses, never fully seen. The forest grew darker despite the morning hour, the canopy above so thick it might have been twilight. Strange growths appeared on the trees, fungi in colors Daniel had never documented, forming patterns that almost resembled written language. The trail ended abruptly at a steep embankment, leading down to another section of the river, wilder than where he had crossed. The child was nowhere to be seen, but halfway across the churning water, a fallen tree formed a natural bridge, and there, clinging to the middle of that log, was a small figure in blue pajamas. This time Daniel was certain. Eli Turner had somehow survived, but was now trapped above the raging water. "Eli! Stay still!" Daniel called over the roar of water. "I'm coming to get you." The boy's head turned slightly, but he made no response. Even from this distance, Daniel could see he was in bad shape, pale, shivering, barely maintaining his grip on the fallen tree. Daniel scanned for the safest approach. The log Eli clung to had once been a massive pine, now creating a precarious bridge across the swollen river. Its surface would be slick with moss and rain, the current below powerful enough to kill if he fell. No time to call for backup, no guarantee help would arrive. This was the moment every ranger trained for, but hoped never to face. Daniel checked his pack straps, ensuring it was secure. He removed his grandfather's silver pocket watch, a ritual before any dangerous crossing, and noted the time, 10:17 a.m. Then he secured a rope to a sturdy tree and looped the other end around his waist. It wouldn't reach all the way across, but might prevent him from being swept downstream if he fell. The first steps onto the log were the hardest. The wood shifted slightly under his weight, its stability questionable. Daniel moved with deliberate care, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Halfway to Eli, the rope reached its limit. Daniel untied it from his waist, now fully committed. "Eli," he called again as he drew closer. "I'm Ranger Daniel. I'm here to take you home." The boy's eyes finally focused on him. What Daniel saw there wasn't relief, it was fear. "He said you'd come," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible above the water. "He said not to go with you." Daniel inched closer, now only 10 feet away. "Who said that, Eli?" "The whispering man." Eli's gaze drifted to something behind Daniel. "He's watching us." Every instinct told Daniel not to turn, to keep his focus on the treacherous footing and the boy. But something cold brushed the back of his neck, not wind, but what felt like fingertips. Daniel reached the boy, kneeling carefully on the log. Up close, Eli's condition was concerning but not critical. Despite 3 nights exposed to the elements, he showed no severe signs of hypothermia or injury. His blue pajamas were torn, but surprisingly clean. "I'm going to carry you back," Daniel said, maintaining a calm tone despite his racing heart. "Put your arms around my neck." Eli hesitated, looking past Daniel again. "He's getting closer." Daniel couldn't help himself. He glanced back. For an instant he thought he saw a tall figure standing at the end of the log, impossibly thin and motionless. When he blinked, it was gone. "Let's get you home, buddy," Daniel said, forcing confidence into his voice. Carefully he lifted Eli onto his back. The boy weighed almost nothing, as if hollowed out by his ordeal. The return crossing was excruciating. Daniel's feet slipped twice, nearly sending them both into the churning water. Eli remained eerily silent, his small hands cold against Daniel's neck. When they finally reached solid ground, Daniel set the boy down gently and wrapped him in an emergency blanket from his pack. He pulled out his radio, attempting contact again, but received only static. "Let me check you over," Daniel said, falling back on his first aid training. Eli's pulse was steady but slow, his skin cold but not dangerously so. The boy stared at the forest with an unsettling intensity. "How did you survive out here, Eli?" Daniel asked, offering water from his canteen. "He kept me safe," Eli whispered. "From the wolves, from the cold. He said I was special." "Who is he, Eli?" The boy's eyes met Daniel's. "He's very old. He lives under the big tree. He knows your wife." Daniel's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "The lady in the pictures in your cabin. He showed me. She's with him now." Eli took a small sip of water. "He said he'll come for you next." "He promised." Daniel reached for his pocket watch to check the time, calculating how long it would take to get Eli to safety. The watch had stopped at 10:17, the exact moment he'd reached the boy. Eli's small hand reached out, touching the timepiece. "Time works different where he lives." A distant howl echoed through the forest. Not a wolf, not any animal Daniel recognized in 30 years of ranging. "We need to move." Daniel said, repacking his supplies. Can you walk? Eli nodded, his eyes still fixed on the trees. He's letting us go for now. But he'll follow. He always follows. Daniel lifted the boy into his arms. Let's get you home. As they moved away from the river, Daniel felt it again, the cold sensation of being watched by something ancient and patient. Dusk approached rapidly as Daniel carried Eli through the darkening forest. The boy's weight seemed to fluctuate, sometimes light as air, other moments surprisingly heavy, as if something unseen clung to him. We'll make camp soon, Daniel said, checking his GPS. The device flickered erratically, coordinates jumping impossibly. Can't risk traveling these trails at night, Eli nodded against his shoulder. He doesn't like fire, he whispered. But it won't stop him for long. Daniel found a defensible position, a small clearing backed by a rock face that eliminated one direction of approach. He worked quickly, gathering firewood and constructing a larger-than-usual fire ring. As flames leapt up, Eli visibly relaxed for the first time. Daniel prepared a simple meal from his provisions, warming broth and energy bars. The boy ate mechanically, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Eli, I need to understand what happened, Daniel said gently. How did you end up by the river? I followed the lights, Eli replied, his voice distant. They looked like fireflies, but bigger. They made shapes in the air, animals and people. One looked like Mom calling me. Daniel nodded, having heard similar stories from lost hikers. That was the first night? When you left the campsite? Yes, but then the lights changed. They turned white and cold. Eli shivered despite the fire's warmth. That's when I met him. The whispering man? Eli nodded, clutching his knees to his chest. He's very tall. His arms and legs are too long. His face? The boy hesitated. Sometimes he doesn't have a face. Sometimes he has too many. Daniel forced himself to remain impassive, though the description sent chills through him. Did he hurt you, Eli? No, he protected me. When the wolves came, he made them go away. When it rained, the water didn't touch me. Eli's voice dropped lower. But he wanted something. What did he want? A promise. Eli reached into his pajama pocket and withdrew something that made Daniel's heart stop, a Polaroid photograph. Daniel accepted it with trembling fingers. The image was blurry but unmistakable, a woman standing beneath an enormous tree. Her face was partially obscured, but Daniel would know that silhouette anywhere. Sarah. He said she's been with him a long time. Eli continued. He said she's waiting. Daniel struggled to form words. This isn't possible. My wife disappeared 15 years ago. Time is different for him, Eli said, repeating his earlier statement. He said some people are special. They can see the doors between places. Like me. His small hand touched Daniel's wrist. Like your wife. Like you. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Daniel's hand moved to his sidearm, eyes scanning the perimeter. Nothing visible, yet the feeling of being observed intensified. What did you promise him, Eli? Daniel asked quietly. That I'd bring you back. Tears formed in the boy's eyes. He said if I didn't, he'd keep me instead. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Daniel assured him, mind racing. You did what you had to survive. The fire dimmed suddenly, though no wind blew. Shadows lengthened around them, stretching in impossible directions, all pointing inward toward their camp. He's here, Eli whispered, pressing against Daniel's side. Daniel felt it too, a pressure change, as if the air itself grew thinner. The hairs on his arms stood on end. Something cold brushed against his consciousness, an ancient, patient hunger. Does he speak to you? Daniel asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Eli nodded. Not with words. He puts thoughts in your head, pictures. What is he saying now? That it's too late, Eli's voice quavered. That you crossed the river. That you're already his. Daniel fed the fire with the last of his gathered wood, creating a temporary surge of light that pushed back the encroaching darkness. In that brief illumination, he glimpsed movement at the edge of the clearing, a figure too tall to be human. Limbs wrong in proportion and number. Close your eyes. Eli, Daniel said quietly. The boy obeyed. Burying his face against Daniel's jacket, slowly, Daniel reached for Thomas's antler whistle. The carved instrument seemed to pulse against his fingers, warm where everything else felt cold. "You protected Eli," Daniel called into the darkness. "And now I'm asking you to let us both go." No response came, but the pressure intensified. The fire sputtered despite the fresh wood. Daniel raised the whistle to his lips. Remembering Thomas's warning, "Blow this only in greatest need," he drew breath, prepared to sound the ancient instrument. From the darkness came a voice, not Eli's, not his own. A voice like stones grinding together, like roots growing through soil. "She waits for you, Daniel Hayes." Dawn arrived with merciful normality. Birdsong replaced the unnatural silence of night, and gentle sunlight filtered through the canopy. Daniel had maintained vigilance until first light, the antler whistle clutched in his hand, unused. The entity had withdrawn after its chilling message, though Daniel felt its lingering presence at the edges of perception. Eli slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring names Daniel didn't recognize. The boy's physical resilience remained remarkable. 3 days alone in a storm-racked forest should have left him in far worse condition. Daniel studied the Polaroid again in daylight. The image remained impossible. Sarah, as she had looked 15 years ago, standing beneath an ancient tree Daniel didn't recognize. The photograph showed no signs of age, its chemicals somehow preserved from deterioration. He slipped it into his breast pocket as Eli stirred awake. "We need to move," Daniel said, offering the boy water. "Do you think you can walk today?" Eli nodded, his eyes clearer than the night before. "He's sleeping now. During the day, he stays under the roots. Under the roots of what tree?" "The first tree," Eli said, as if this explained everything. "That's what he calls it." Daniel packed their meager camp while considering options. The bridge he'd crossed was compromised. The river was uncrossable without specialized equipment. According to his map, there was an old fire watch tower, approximately 4 miles northeast. Their best chance for shelter and possibly communication. "We're heading to a tower," he told Eli. "People might be able to find us." "There." The boy looked doubtful but didn't argue. As they prepared to leave, Daniel switched on his digital voice recorder, stating their position and intentions. Standard procedure when conditions deteriorated. He returned it to his pocket, switched off to conserve battery. They made steady progress through the morning. Daniel noticed Eli seemed to intuitively understand which paths to avoid, steering them away from certain thickets or gullies without explanation. When questioned, the boy simply said, "That way feels wrong." By midday, they reached a small clearing that made Daniel pause. Perfectly circular like the others he'd found, but with a difference. At its center lay a depression in the earth, shaped like a massive footprint. "What made this?" Daniel asked. Though he suspected the answer, Eli approached the impression cautiously. "He comes up different ways, sometimes through water, sometimes through trees. Sometimes straight from the ground." The boy knelt and placed his small hand into part of the impression. "He showed me things while I was with him. Pictures in my head. The forest long ago, before people. The caves under the mountains where his kind first slept." "His kind?" "There are more." Eli shrugged. "Were once. He's alone now?" The boy's expression showed an unnerving mixture of pity and fear. "That's why he collects people. Special ones who can see him." Daniel helped Eli to his feet, eager to move beyond the clearing. "Let's keep going." "The tower isn't far." As they continued, Daniel felt the weight of the voice recorder shifting in his pocket. He reached for it, surprised to find it warm to the touch. The device was switched on, though he distinctly remembered turning it off. The recording indicator showed it running. Daniel pressed stop, then replay, holding it where Eli couldn't hear. Through static and distortion came whispers, words in no language Daniel recognized, but that somehow conveyed meaning. Ancient, patient, hungry. Then unmistakably a woman's voice, Sarah's voice. "Daniel. The tree, under the roots. I'm still—" The recording dissolved into static. Daniel's hands trembled as he switched it off again. "You heard her," Eli said quietly, having moved beside him unnoticed. Daniel pocketed the device. "We need to keep moving. She's not dead," Eli continued matter-of-factly. "None of them are. They're just elsewhere. He keeps them. Why? What does he want with them? Company. Eli's answer was simple but chilling in its implication. Forever is a long time to be alone. They walked in silence after that. The forest thinned somewhat as they gained elevation, approaching the ridge where the watchtower stood. Daniel caught glimpses of it through breaks in the trees, an aging wooden structure from another era of forest management. As they neared, Daniel noticed something that made his heart sink. The tower, supposedly abandoned for decades, showed signs of recent habitation. Smoke rose from its upper level. "Someone's there," he said, instinctively drawing Eli behind him. The boy's eyes widened. "It's not a someone. He can be in many places at once." Daniel unholstered his sidearm, weighing options. The tower represented their best chance for communication and rescue. They had nowhere else to go. "Stay close to me," he told Eli. "No matter what happens." The boy nodded, slipping his small hand into Daniel's. Together, they approached the waiting tower. The watchtower stood like a sentinel against the afternoon sky, its weather-beaten structure a relic of earlier forest management practices. 3 stories tall, with a glass-enclosed observation deck, it had once served to spot distant wildfires before satellite monitoring made such outposts obsolete. Daniel approached cautiously, Eli's hand still in his. The smoke he'd spotted came from a metal chimney pipe extending from the top level. It curled upward in a thin grey line, too consistent for a building that should be abandoned. "Wait here," Daniel instructed, positioning Eli behind a large pine 30 yards from the tower. "If anything happens, run downhill toward the river. Follow it downstream until you reach the ranger checkpoint." Eli clutched Daniel's sleeve. "Don't go in there, please. I need to check if it's safe." Daniel gently removed the boy's hand. 3 minutes. "If I don't come back out, you run. Understood?" Eli nodded reluctantly. Daniel approached the tower's base, sidearm drawn but pointed downward. The wooden steps leading to the first level had been recently repaired, fresh-cut lumber replacing rotted boards. "Forest Service," Daniel called out. "Anyone inside?" No response came. The tower's door hung partially open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Daniel climbed the steps slowly, each creak of wood beneath his feet sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. The first level was a single room with basic amenities, a table, chairs, storage cabinets. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed except for footprints on the floor. Multiple sets, some small like a child's. A wood stove sat cold in the corner, contradicting the smoke from above. Daniel examined the footprints closely. They seemed to lead up the interior staircase to the second level, none coming back down. He ascended quietly, hyper-aware of each sound. The second level contained cots and more extensive supplies. Canned food, water, first aid equipment. All seemed organized with military precision, not the hallmarks of squatters or hikers. A battery-powered radio sat on a side table, its power light glowing green. A functioning radio could be their salvation. Daniel pressed the transmit button. "This is Ranger Daniel Hayes, with recovered missing person Eli Turner." "Anyone copy?" The radio emitted only static, then clicked off, despite the power indicator remaining lit. Daniel tried again, with the same result. On a small desk beneath the window, something caught Daniel's eye. A collection of carved wooden figures, each a few inches tall. Human forms with remarkable detail, arranged in a semicircle. Daniel counted 17 figures, varying in apparent age and dress, with mounting unease. He recognized similarities between certain carvings and photographs he'd seen of missing persons from these forests over the decades. A girl in a distinctive coat who'd vanished in 1992, an elderly botanist lost in 2004. Most disturbing was the newest-looking figure at the end of the row, a small boy in what appeared to be pajamas. The carving bore an unmistakable resemblance to Eli. Daniel pocketed the figure representing Eli and moved toward the final staircase leading to the observation deck. The smoke's source would be there. As he placed his foot on the first step, a voice called from below. "Daniel?" Eli's voice. "Are you okay?" It's been more than 3 minutes. Eli, I told you to wait outside. Daniel hurried back down, finding the boy standing in the center of the second-level room. I felt him leave, Eli said simply. It was safe to come in. Daniel knelt to Eli's eye level. What do you mean, leave? He was here, but now he's gone back to the tree. He leaves traces, though. Eli's gaze drifted to the wooden figures on the desk. He keeps reminders. Daniel showed Eli the carving that resembled him. Do you know what these are? The boy nodded solemnly. The others, the ones he's collected. He showed me some of them. Eli reached for a carving of a woman with long hair. This one's your wife. Daniel examined the figure more closely, his throat tightening. The carving captured Sarah's likeness with impossible accuracy, details no stranger could know. The gentle curve of her smile, the way she tucked hair behind one ear. These carvings, Daniel said, struggling to maintain composure. They're recent. Someone's been here. He was, Eli confirmed. This is one of his doorways. But something scared him away. What could scare him? Eli's answer was interrupted by a mechanical whirring from above. The sound of a helicopter approaching. Daniel rushed to the window. Through the trees, he glimpsed a search and rescue helicopter circling nearby. Their chance for extraction. We need to signal them, he said, heading for the observation deck. There are flares up there. As Daniel reached the top level, the source of the smoke became apparent. A small fire burned in a metal container, controlled and deliberate. Beside it lay a logbook, open to a recently written page. The entry, dated the previous day, contained only 6 words. He's coming. She waits. They all wait. The handwriting matched Sarah's exactly. Daniel grabbed the emergency flare kit from the observation deck cabinet. His mind raced with questions about the logbook entry, but survival took precedence. The helicopter represented their best chance of getting Eli safely out of the forest. Stay back from the windows, he instructed as he prepared a signal flare. The helicopter circled approximately half a mile distant, close enough to see a flare, but too far to spot them otherwise. As Daniel moved to the external platform to launch the flare, a sudden chill swept through the tower. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the interior windows, despite the afternoon sun outside. He's coming back, Eli whispered, eyes widening. He knows they're looking for us. Daniel hesitated only a moment before pushing through the door to the observation platform. The helicopter maintained its search pattern to the east. He aimed the flare gun skyward and fired. The red streak cut dramatically across the blue, impossible to miss. Inside, glass shattered. Daniel rushed back to find Eli backed against the wall, staring at the broken window on the opposite side. What happened? Daniel demanded, scanning for threats. He's angry, Eli said simply. He doesn't want them to take us. The helicopter banked, clearly having spotted the flare. Relief flooded through Daniel until he noticed something peculiar. Storm clouds forming with unnatural speed, gathering directly above the tower while the surrounding sky remained clear. His radio crackled to life. Forest Service Tower, this is Rescue Chopper 7. We've spotted your flare. Preparing for extraction. Over. Daniel grabbed the radio. This is Ranger Hayes with Eli Turner. Be advised, weather is deteriorating rapidly. Recommend immediate extraction. Over. Copy that. 8 or 3 minutes. Prepare for rooftop pickup. Over. Daniel turned to Eli. We're getting out of here. The boy's expression remained doubtful. He won't let us go that easily. The wind intensified, howling around the tower. The structure groaned under the assault, timbers creaking ominously. Rain began to fall, heavy drops that seemed to target the observation deck specifically. We need to secure this level, Daniel said, moving to close and latch the exterior door. As he reached for the handle, something caught his eye, an object partially embedded in the wooden doorframe. It appeared to be a small copper disc, ancient and green with patina. Concentric circles had been etched into its surface, surrounding symbols matching those Daniel had seen on the trees. It seemed intentionally placed, not decorative or functional to the tower's original purpose. Daniel pried it loose with his knife. The moment the amulet came free, the tower shuddered violently. Below, the main door slammed shut. Darkness seemed to pool in the corners of the room despite the daylight outside. "You shouldn't have done that," Eli said quietly. It was keeping him out. The helicopter approached through the unnatural storm, fighting strong wind shear. Its searchlight cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the tower's roof. "We need to get to the roof access," Daniel said, pocketing the copper amulet. The hatch to the roof was secured by a rusted padlock. He used the butt of his sidearm to break it open. The wind nearly knocked them down as they emerged onto the roof. Rain lashed horizontally, stinging their faces. The helicopter hovered 30 feet above, a rescue worker preparing to descend on a line. A sound rose above the storm, not wind but a howl of rage that seemed to come from the forest itself. The trees below the tower bent unnaturally, their tops inclining toward the structure as if drawn by powerful magnets. "He's coming!" Eli shouted over the din, pointing toward the tree line. Daniel saw it then, a darkness moving between trunks, too tall, too fluid to be human. It advanced with impossible speed. The rescue worker descended, harness extended for extraction. Daniel fastened Eli into it first, securing the straps around the boy's small frame. "You're going home," Daniel yelled over the rotor wash. Eli grabbed Daniel's arm. "You have to come too. If you stay, he'll take you to her. That's the plan." Daniel signaled the rescue worker to retract the line. "I'll find another way out." "No!" Eli's cry was lost as he was hoisted upward towards safety. The entity reached the base of the tower. The entire structure trembled, wood splintering from unseen forces. Daniel knew it wouldn't withstand the assault for long. The rescue worker descended again with the harness. 20 feet above, 10 feet. Below, the first-level door burst inward with a sound like an explosion. Something began to climb the interior stairs, each footstep causing the tower to shudder. Daniel reached for the harness, then hesitated, fingers touching the amulet in his pocket. A choice crystallized in his mind: escape now or find Sarah. The entity reached the observation deck. Through the floor hatch, Daniel glimpsed a form of stretched darkness, limbs too numerous and too long. "I'm sorry," he told the rescue worker, stepping away from the harness. "There's someone else I need to find." The tower gave a final shudder and began to collapse. Daniel leapt from the collapsing tower, rolling as he hit the ground to absorb the impact. Behind him, the wooden structure imploded with a deafening crash. Above, the helicopter struggled against unnatural wind currents, Eli's small face visible in the side window as they retreated. The boy was safe. That knowledge gave Daniel strength as he scrambled to his feet, facing the swirling darkness that had been pursuing them. But instead of advancing, the entity seemed to lose cohesion, stretching thin like smoke in wind before vanishing completely. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the chaos of moments before. The storm dissipated as quickly as it had formed, sunlight breaking through dissolving clouds. Daniel remained motionless, senses alert for any sign of threat. Nothing moved in the forest around him. Even the wildlife had gone silent. He checked his radio and GPS, both dead, their electronics fried. With no immediate danger apparent, Daniel approached the tower's wreckage. Most of the structure had collapsed inward, creating a dangerous tangle of splintered wood and twisted metal. As he circled the debris, a flash of color caught his eye, something leather-bound protruding from beneath a fallen beam. Carefully, he extracted it, a field guide to North American flora, its cover worn and water-damaged. Sarah's field guide. She'd carried it on every hike they'd taken together, meticulously documenting plant species they encountered. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. Sarah's neat handwriting filled the margins, but not with botanical observations. Instead, he found dates, locations, and initials. Coded entries that didn't match any standard scientific notation he recognized. One entry was circled repeatedly: BW Ridge, coordinates match 78, 85, 92, 99 disappearances. 7-year cycle, TM says markers indicate boundary. TM, Thomas Mitchell. The tribal elder had known Sarah. Other notes mentioned thin places, and doors between, terminology Thomas had used with Daniel. Sarah had been investigating the disappearances, following the same patterns Daniel had only recently discovered. The final entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance. Found Central Point. Ancient tree, not on any survey. Symbols match those from colonial accounts of forest devil. Going back tomorrow with recording equipment, she had found the tree, the first tree, as Eli had called it. Daniel sat heavily on a fallen log, the field guide clutched in his hands. Sarah hadn't simply vanished on a routine hike. She'd been deliberately searching for what had now taken her, the same entity that had briefly captured Eli. The copper amulet seemed to grow heavier in his pocket. He withdrew it, studying the ancient symbols that matched those in Sarah's notes. A boundary marker, according to both Thomas and Sarah. Something meant to keep the entity contained. Why? "Show yourself to me now," Daniel whispered to the silent forest. After 15 years? No answer came, but he felt watched again, not with the malevolent intensity from before, but with patient interest. Daniel opened the field guide to its inner cover, where Sarah had written their home address and phone number. Below it, in handwriting he hadn't noticed before, "If found, tell Daniel. Parallel latitude to Lookout Point, crossing western tributary. Count 7 old-growth pines north. The tree stands alone. Coordinates disguised as casual directions." Sarah had left him a map to the first tree. Daniel checked his analog compass, still functioning despite the electronic disruptions. Lookout Point lay 5 miles southwest. If he moved quickly, he could reach Sarah's coordinates before nightfall. Logic told him to head back to Ranger headquarters. Report what had happened, bring a team with proper equipment. But 15 years of searching for answers compelled him forward. Sarah was somewhere within this forest, not dead, but taken. Kept Eli's words echoed. Time works different where he lives. For Sarah, perhaps only days or weeks had passed while Daniel lived through 15 years of grief. The possibility burned through him like fire, obliterating caution. He gathered essential supplies from his scattered pack, abandoning anything non-critical to travel faster. The copper amulet went into his breast pocket alongside Sarah's photograph and the small wooden carving of Eli he'd taken from the tower. As Daniel oriented himself toward Lookout Point, the forest seemed to open before him, paths appearing where dense underbrush had been moments before. The entity wasn't trying to stop him anymore. It was guiding him. "I'm coming for you, Sarah," he promised, stepping onto the newly revealed path. Behind him, the wreckage of the tower settled with creaks and groans. Above, the rescue helicopter had disappeared completely, carrying Eli back to safety and civilization. Daniel Hayes walked alone into the deepening forest, following coordinates left by a wife he'd believed dead for 15 years. The forest grew denser as Daniel followed Sarah's coordinates. Ancient trees crowded together, their canopies blocking most sunlight. Moss carpeted everything, muffling his footsteps to whispers. Hours passed in green-tinted twilight as he pushed steadily southwest toward Lookout Point. Daniel's ranger training told him to mark his path, but some instinct warned against it. This journey wasn't meant to be retraced. Each step felt increasingly like crossing a threshold rather than traversing distance. He reached the western tributary by mid-afternoon, a stream cutting through stone that wasn't on any official forest map. Daniel knelt to refill his water bottle, noticing how unusually clear the water ran. No sediment, no insects, no fish. Pristine to the point of lifelessness. After crossing, Daniel counted 7 massive pines northward, as Sarah's notes instructed. Each tree bore subtle markings. Not obvious carvings, but patterns in the bark that seemed simultaneously natural and deliberate. Beyond the 7th pine, the forest opened into a clearing unlike any Daniel had encountered in 30 years of ranging. Perfectly circular, perhaps 50 yards across, its perimeter defined by trees bent outward, as if bowing away from the center. The ground within contained no undergrowth, just bare soil and scattered stones arranged in patterns too precise to be random. Daniel stopped at the edge, remembering Thomas's warnings about thin places. This was certainly one. The air itself felt different here, heavier yet somehow more permeable. As he surveyed the clearing, Daniel's foot struck something partially buried. Kneeling, he brushed away soil to reveal a fragment of stone tablet, approximately the size of his hand. Its surface bore weathered hieroglyphics unlike any Native American symbols he recognized. Older, more angular, depicting elongated figures, leading smaller humanoid shapes beneath what appeared to be an enormous tree. Daniel photographed the tablet before carefully placing it in his pack. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the clearing. At the center, he could now discern a slight depression in the earth, circular like a dried pond. According to Sarah's coordinates, this should be where the tree stood, the first tree that Eli and the entity had mentioned. Yet nothing grew here now. Daniel approached the central depression cautiously. The soil grew softer underfoot, almost spongy. Kneeling again, he pressed his palm against the ground. A heartbeat pulsed beneath his hand, not his own, but something. Massive and slow, reverberating through the earth itself. Daniel jerked back. The ground where he'd touched began to shift, soil crumbling away, to reveal a dark opening barely wide enough for a person to slip through. Cold air flowed upward from the hole, carrying scents of mineral and decay, and something older, a primordial smell that triggered instinctive fear. This was it, the way beneath the roots that Eli had mentioned. Daniel shone his flashlight into the opening. The beam illuminated a narrow tunnel descending at a steep angle, its walls lined with roots that moved subtly, like breathing lungs. "Sarah!" he called into the darkness. His voice echoed strangely, distorting until it sounded like a different name entirely. No response came, but the tunnel seemed to widen slightly. An invitation. The sun touched the horizon. Twilight would be brief in these dense woods, and Daniel had no desire to be in this clearing after dark. He had to decide quickly, descend now or retreat to safer ground and return in daylight. The copper amulet in his pocket grew cold, almost painfully so. Daniel removed it, finding the metal now emitted a faint bluish glow, its engraved symbols more pronounced than before. As darkness gathered at the forest edges, Daniel felt the now familiar sensation of being watched. The entity was near, observing his choice. "Why Sarah?" Daniel asked aloud. "Why her? Why any of them?" A whisper came, not from the tunnel, but from all around. "The special ones see. The special ones hear. The special ones can walk between." "Let her go!" Daniel demanded. The voice, if it could be called that, seemed amused. "She stays willingly now, as will you." Anger flared within Daniel. "Show yourself. No more shadows and whispers." "Below," came the reply. "All answers lie below." The last sunlight vanished. In the sudden darkness, the tunnel mouth glowed with the same faint blue as the amulet. The roots lining the passage writhed more actively now, reaching upward like beckoning fingers. Daniel secured his pack, checked his flashlight and sidearm, and removed Sarah's photograph from his pocket. Her smile gave him courage, even as he questioned whether he was being brave or merely manipulated. "I'm coming," he said, uncertain whether he addressed Sarah or the entity. Daniel Hayes slipped into the narrow opening, descending into the unknown darkness beneath the forest floor. The tunnel descended at an impossible angle. By any natural law, Daniel should have been sliding uncontrollably, yet the passageway seemed to adjust beneath his feet, providing secure footing. His flashlight beam revealed walls composed of densely interwoven roots that occasionally shifted like muscle fibers. Time became meaningless in the unchanging darkness. Daniel's watch had stopped at the moment he entered the tunnel, frozen at 7:42 p.m. The only constant was the gentle pulse that ran through everything, the heartbeat he'd felt in the clearing above, stronger now. After what might have been minutes or hours, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Daniel's flashlight batteries began to fade, the beam weakening to a dull glow, barely illuminating his immediate surroundings. As the artificial light died, Daniel noticed a soft blue illumination emanating from the chamber walls. Clusters of fungi clung to the roots, each cap glowing with bioluminescence. Unlike any species he'd documented, these growths formed distinct patterns, whirls and lines too organized to be random, resembling a form of written language. Daniel approached one cluster, mesmerized by its pulsing light. Without thinking, he reached out and touched a glowing cap. Images flooded his mind, fragmented memories not his own. A young woman in 1950s clothing running through the forest. An elderly man documenting tree rings with scientific equipment. A colonial-era child following lights between trees. Each memory ended at this same tunnel, this same descent. Daniel jerked his hand away, heart racing. The fungi had somehow stored impressions from everyone who had passed this way. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people across centuries. "They remember," came a whisper from deeper in the tunnel. "As do I." Daniel's head snapped up, flashlight forgotten. "Where's Sarah?" Further, deeper, where time pools rather than flows. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the root walls themselves. It sounded almost gentle now, without the menace that had pursued them at the tower. "Why show me the way now, after 15 years? Daniel demanded, a rustling sound like dry leaves and wind. 7 cycles. 7 completions. The pattern requires balance. Daniel remembered Thomas's words about 7-year cycles and Sarah's notes documenting disappearances in the same pattern. What happens after 7 cycles? Renewal, change. The door opens wider. The glowing fungi brightened momentarily, illuminating a continuation of the tunnel beyond the chamber. Daniel understood he was being guided forward. And Sarah? What's happened to her in these 15 years? Time is different below. For her, the waiting has been brief. Hope surged through Daniel so powerfully it nearly brought him to his knees. If Sarah had experienced only a fraction of the time he'd endured without her. He pressed onward into the narrowing passage, the fungi lighting his way in patches of blue radiance. The tunnel began to change, root walls giving way to actual stone, not natural cave formations, but worked masonry of immense age. Carvings covered these surfaces, depicting the same elongated entities from the stone tablet fragment, shown interacting with humans through different historical periods. One carving stopped Daniel cold, a depiction of a woman who unmistakably resembled Sarah. Standing beside one of the entities, their hands joined in what appeared to be cooperation rather than capture. "She understands now," the voice commented, noticing Daniel's attention on the carving. "As you will. Understands what?" "Our purpose, our need, our gift." The passage opened into a vast underground space that defied comprehension. Daniel stood at the edge of what appeared to be an inverted forest, massive roots forming a canopy above, descending from the distant ceiling. Below spread a landscape of gentle hills and shallow pools of luminescent water. Stone structures resembling dwellings dotted the landscape. Their architecture unlike anything in human history. Most striking was the central feature, an enormous trunk descending from above, wider than any redwood Daniel had ever seen. The first tree growing downward into this underground realm rather than upward toward the sky. Lights moved among the hills and structures, some blue like the fungi, others warm amber. As Daniel's eyes adjusted, he realized these were people, each carrying or somehow generating light. "The collected," the voice explained. "Those who could see, those who could hear, those who could walk between." Daniel scanned the distant figures desperately. "Is Sarah among them?" "She waits by the heartwood. She has prepared for your arrival since the moment she understood time's pattern." Daniel took an uncertain step forward, then another, descending toward the impossible landscape below. The copper amulet in his pocket vibrated against his chest, resonating with the pulse of this place. "What are you?" Daniel asked, finally giving voice to the question that had haunted him since finding Eli. The air thickened before him, condensing into a form both familiar and utterly alien, the entity that had pursued them through the forest, now revealing itself fully. "We are the first, before your kind walked upright, before the ice retreated. We have always been." Its form shifted constantly, simultaneously humanoid and something else entirely, limbs elongating and retracting, features flowing like wax. Only the eyes remained constant, depthless and ancient, regarding Daniel with intelligence that predated human evolution. "We have been waiting for you, Daniel Hayes. The 7th cycle is complete. The renewal begins." Daniel stood transfixed before the shifting form of the entity. Despite his years searching for answers about Sarah's disappearance, despite the terror of the forest pursuit, he found himself strangely calm in the presence of this ancient being. "Take me to her," he said simply. The entity's form solidified momentarily into something almost human, a tall, slender figure with elongated limbs. It gestured toward a path leading down to the inverted forest below. "Follow," it said, voice now coming from the figure rather than the surrounding air. They descended together, Daniel acutely aware of eyes, watching from the strange dwellings they passed. Glimpses of faces, human yet somehow altered, appeared in doorways and windows. Some smiled in recognition, others observed with solemn curiosity. "Who are they?" Daniel asked. "All taken like Eli? Like Sarah?" "The special ones," the entity replied. "Those who could perceive the thinness between worlds. Those whose minds could comprehend our existence without breaking. You've been collecting people for how long?" "Since your kind first developed consciousness capable of recognizing us. Those who saw beyond the material world. They approached a structure unlike the others, a dwelling partially incorporated into the massive central trunk of the inverted tree. Its walls were a seamless blend of living wood and crystalline material that caught and refracted the ambient light. "She waits inside," the entity said, stopping short of the entrance. Daniel hesitated. "What will I find? Is she still herself?" The entity's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "More herself than ever before. Time changes all beings, Daniel Hayes, even us. Even you." Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped through the crystalline doorway. The interior was a single circular room, its ceiling alive with gently pulsing roots that emitted soft amber light. At the center stood a table formed from the same living wood as the walls, covered with objects Daniel recognized from Sarah's research: notebooks, specimen containers, recording devices, and there, bent over the table examining something, was Sarah. She looked exactly as she had 15 years ago, not a day older, dressed in the hiking clothes she'd worn when she disappeared. Her hair, her posture, her focused expression as she worked, all precisely as he remembered. "Sarah," he whispered, voice breaking. She looked up, her face registering first surprise, then joy so intense it transformed her features. "Daniel, you found me!" She rushed to him, her touch warm and solid as they embraced. Not a ghost or dream, but his wife, real and alive. For a long moment, they simply held each other, Daniel's mind struggling to reconcile 15 years of grief with this impossible reunion. When they finally separated, Sarah's expression grew serious. "How long has it been for you, above?" 15 years, Daniel replied. "But Thomas said time works differently here." Sarah nodded. "For me, it's been perhaps 3 months. I've been learning, Daniel. Things no human has ever understood about what exists alongside our world." She returned to the table, lifting a small object, a crystal shard about the size of a thumb, perfectly transparent except for a blue luminescence at its core. "Here," she said, placing it in his palm. "This will help you understand faster than I can explain." The moment the crystal touched his skin, the room around Daniel seemed to dissolve. He experienced a cascade of Sarah's memories since her arrival, her initial fear, her attempts to escape, And then her gradual understanding of where she was and what had brought her here. He saw through her eyes as the entity, which she had come to call the caretaker, revealed. The true nature of the first tree and the realm beneath. How this underground world existed as a repository of consciousness, a place where time operated differently, allowing the preservation of minds that would otherwise be lost. The crystal showed Sarah's discovery that the collected were not prisoners but participants in something vast and ancient, a gathering of perception across human history, creating a composite consciousness that served some greater purpose not yet fulfilled. Most strikingly, Daniel witnessed Sarah's transition from captive to willing collaborator, her scientific curiosity ultimately overcoming her fear as she began documenting this hidden world. The vision faded, leaving Daniel disoriented but filled with understanding that would have taken years to explain in words. "You stayed willingly," he said. "Not a question but a realization. After I understood, yes." Sarah took his hands. "But I never stopped missing you, never stopped hoping you would find your way here." The boy, Eli, he was bait to bring me here. Sarah's expression clouded. "The caretaker's methods can be difficult to accept, but it needed you, Daniel, for the completion of the cycle." "What cycle?" "What completion?" Daniel asked, dread mixing with wonder. "What am I meant to do here?" Sarah's eyes met his, filled with both love and apprehension. "To bridge the worlds, Daniel. The seventh cycle ends with you. Bridge the worlds," Daniel echoed, trying to process Sarah's words. "I don't understand." Sarah moved to a carved wooden cabinet and retrieved something wrapped in silk. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed a palm-sized object unlike anything Daniel had ever seen, a complex arrangement of metal rings and spheres, reminiscent of an astrolabe or orrery, but with components that seemed to shift position as he looked at them. This was discovered by the first human to enter this realm. "Thousands of years ago," Sarah explained, placing it on the table. "The caretaker believes it predates even its own existence." Daniel leaned closer, fascinated despite his confusion. The device appeared to be made from a metal unknown to modern science, neither tarnished nor reflective, with a dull bronze hue that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. "What does it do?" he asked. "It's a key of sorts." "The caretaker calls it the convergence." Sarah manipulated one of the outer rings, causing inner components to realign with soft clicking sounds. For centuries, it's remained incomplete, its components unable to achieve perfect alignment. As Daniel watched, the device began to move on its own, rings rotating slowly. The moment his shadow fell across it, the movement accelerated. "It responds to you," Sarah whispered. Stepping back, the components continued realigning themselves, each click louder than the last, until they locked into a configuration that somehow appeared both chaotic and perfectly ordered. A soft hum emanated from the device, and the metal began to glow with an inner light. "7 cycles," Sarah continued, watching the device with scientific fascination. 7 completions of the pattern. The caretaker has been gathering those who can perceive the spaces between worlds, collecting consciousness, building understanding across human history. "For what purpose?" Daniel asked, unable to look away from the glowing device. "The boundaries between realities are thinning, Daniel. Not just here, but everywhere. What the indigenous people called thin places are spreading, becoming unstable." Daniel thought of the strange occurrences in the forest above, the unnatural weather, the distortions of time and space. "And this is supposed to help somehow?" Sarah nodded. "The convergence requires 7 cycles to activate fully. Each cycle, the caretaker collects those with the necessary perceptual abilities, building a composite consciousness capable of understanding and manipulating the boundaries between worlds. And I'm what? The final piece? You're the bridge, Daniel. Your connection to both worlds, your ability to move between them, your bond with those on both sides." Sarah's expression was both proud and concerned. The caretaker has been preparing for this moment since before recorded human history. Daniel shook his head, overwhelmed. I'm just a forest ranger, Sarah. I track missing hikers and manage wildfires. I'm not. Whatever this is, you're more than you realize, came the entity's voice from the doorway. The caretaker had returned, its form now more clearly defined, still inhuman in its proportions, but maintaining a consistent shape. You followed Sarah's trail when others gave up, it continued. You perceived what others could not in the forest. You found the pathways and markers. Your mind adapted to the impossible without breaking. The caretaker approached the table, its movements fluid yet somehow angular, as if it occupied more dimensions than were visible. The seventh cycle ends with the joining of separated consciousnesses, it explained. The boy was the catalyst. Sarah is the anchor. You are the bridge. Eli, Daniel said suddenly. Is he safe? Above? The boy has returned to his family, the caretaker confirmed. His role is complete. Daniel turned back to Sarah. And if I refuse this role, if I just want to take you home? Sarah's expression softened with compassion. There is no home to return to, Daniel, not as it was. The thinning has progressed too far. Without stabilization, the boundaries will continue to erode until worlds bleed together chaotically. She gestured around them. This realm exists as a buffer, a controlled intersection of realities. What happens here prevents catastrophic convergence elsewhere. The device on the table pulsed more intensely, its components continuing to shift and align. With each new configuration, the ambient light in the room changed subtly, as if reality itself was being tuned like an instrument. I need time to think, Daniel said finally. This is too much, the caretaker nodded, a surprisingly human gesture. Time remains, though less than before. The convergence has begun, but will not complete without your conscious participation. It turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. Walk among the collected, Daniel Hayes. Speak with those who came before. Understand what is at stake. After the entity departed, Daniel sank into a chair, mind reeling. Sarah knelt before him, taking his hands. I know how this sounds, she said gently. I felt the same confusion when I first arrived. But what's happening is real, Daniel, and larger than either of us. Daniel met her gaze, finding the same determined intelligence he'd fallen in love with decades ago. Show me everything, he said finally. I need to understand what I'm being asked to do. Sarah led Daniel through the underground settlement, each step revealing new wonders. The dwellings they passed blended seamlessly with the living roots above. Architecture that seemed both grown and constructed. Inhabitants nodded in greeting, people from different eras united in this timeless realm. How many are there? Daniel asked, noting the diversity of the collected, different ages, ethnicities, time periods evident in their clothing and mannerisms. Over 300 spanning thousands of years, Sarah replied, each chosen for their ability to perceive what others cannot. She touched a pendant around her neck that Daniel hadn't noticed before, an intricate lattice of thin, living roots forming an abstract pattern. All the inhabitants wore similar necklaces, each uniquely configured, yet clearly part of a cohesive design. These connect us to each other and to the first tree, Sarah explained. Through them, we share knowledge, experience, even memories across time. A young woman approached, her clothing suggesting early 20th century origin. Around her neck hung a root necklace more elaborate than most. This is Eleanor, Sarah introduced. She arrived in 1918 and has become something of a historian for the collected. Eleanor smiled warmly. We've been expecting you, Daniel. Your arrival completes a pattern centuries in formation. So I've been told, Daniel replied, unease mixing with fascination. Though I still don't understand what's expected of me. Eleanor gestured toward a structure, larger than the others, built directly into the massive trunk of the inverted tree. Perhaps seeing the confluence will help clarify. Inside the structure, Daniel found himself in a vast chamber where dozens of root-like tendrils descended from the ceiling, each connecting to a seated person deep in meditation. Their necklaces glowed with soft light, pulsing in synchronization. The composite consciousness, Sarah explained quietly. Here, the collected merge their perceptions and experiences temporarily, creating understanding beyond what any individual mind could achieve. Daniel watched, transfixed as patterns of light flowed through the connected individuals. "What are they doing?" "Monitoring the boundaries," Eleanor said. "Observing the thinning places in reality, reinforcing the weakest points." She guided Daniel to a central platform where a three-dimensional representation hovered, a complex lattice of light depicting what appeared to be overlapping realities. For millennia, the worlds remained properly separated, with only occasional, localized thinning, Eleanor explained. But in recent centuries, the boundaries have deteriorated rapidly. Without intervention, catastrophic collapse is inevitable. The display shifted, showing cascading failures across the lattice, realities bleeding into one another chaotically. "What caused this?" Daniel asked. "Consciousness itself," came the caretaker's voice as it entered the chamber. As human perception evolved, awareness of other possibilities grew. Each mind that glimpses beyond its reality weakens the separation incrementally. The entity approached the platform, manipulating the display to zoom in on specific failure points, including one Daniel recognized as Blackwater Ridge. "Perceptions shape reality more than you understand," the caretaker continued. "The collected serve as conscious anchors, maintaining separation through their shared awareness." Daniel studied the display intently. "And my role in this?" "The seventh cycle requires a conscious bridge, one who exists simultaneously in multiple states of reality." The caretaker's form shifted subtly as it spoke. "Your bond with Sarah created this potential. Your grief kept you partially in the world where she still existed, even as your physical form remained above. You're saying I've been, existing in two realities for 15 years? Sarah nodded. "It's why you could perceive what others couldn't in the forest. Why you could find pathways invisible to others. Your consciousness has been split since I disappeared." Eleanor touched her necklace, which responded by extending a small tendril. "Would you like to see?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The tendril reached toward him, lightly touching his forehead. Instantly, Daniel perceived himself as the collected did, a being existing in multiple states simultaneously, trailing connections to both the world above and the realm below. Unlike the others in the chamber, whose consciousness was firmly anchored in this place, Daniel's awareness stretched across the boundary. The convergence device responds to this dual state, the caretaker explained as the vision faded. With your conscious participation, the boundaries can be reinforced rather than continuing to deteriorate. Daniel turned to Sarah. "And what happens to us afterward?" Her expression mixed hope with uncertainty. "The caretaker believes we'll have a choice. Remain here as guardians of the boundary or return above, though changed by the experience." "You mean continue living our lives together?" "Potentially," the caretaker interjected, "though neither as you were before, nor entirely as you are now." Daniel looked around the chamber at the connected individuals, people who had sacrificed their original lives for this greater purpose. They appeared peaceful, even fulfilled, but the weight of their collective sacrifice was palpable. "I need to speak with Sarah," he said finally. "Alone?" The caretaker nodded, withdrawing silently. Eleanor followed, leaving them beside the glowing display of intersecting realities. "Is this what you want?" Daniel asked when they were alone. "This existence?" Sarah considered carefully before answering. "I found purpose here beyond anything I could have imagined. But without you, it's remained incomplete." She took his hand, her touch grounding him amid the impossible surroundings. "Whatever we choose, Daniel, I want us to choose together." Daniel and Sarah walked along a pathway that wound through the heart of the underground realm. Root lights illuminated their way, responding to their presence by brightening as they passed. They had been talking for hours, weighing impossible choices with the limited understanding humans could bring to such cosmic matters. "What if we just left?" Daniel asked. returned to our cabin, resumed our lives. Sarah's expression was gentle but firm. The thinning would continue. Eventually, realities would bleed together uncontrollably, and the caretaker would find someone else, another bridge. No one else has your specific connection, existing in multiple states of reality for exactly 7 cycles. Sarah squeezed his hand. We're not being manipulated, Daniel. We're being asked to help because we genuinely can. Their path led to a small structure apart from the others, built into a crystal formation rather than the living roots. Its surface shimmered with opalescent light. There's something you should see before you decide, Sarah said, guiding him inside. The interior contained a single object, what appeared to be a mirror, though its surface rippled like liquid silver. Unlike conventional mirrors, it emitted its own soft light. The collected call it the temporal mirror, Sarah explained. It shows not just reflections, but timelines. What was, what is, what could be, Daniel approached cautiously. Instead of his current reflection, the mirror showed him as he had been 15 years ago, the day before Sarah disappeared. Beside him, Sarah appeared as she was now. It reads our temporal signatures, Sarah said. Mine is fixed at the moment I entered this realm. Yours is more complex. As they watched, the mirror's surface shifted, showing Daniel alone at their cabin, growing older through the years of searching. Then Sarah alone in this underground world, conducting her research. Their separate timelines running parallel but disconnected. Can it show the future? Daniel asked. Possibilities only, Sarah replied. The paths that emerge from choices not yet made. The mirror rippled again. Now it displayed a chaotic scene, their forest above, but with reality visibly fracturing. Trees partially existing, partially not. Animals merging with surroundings. The sky itself torn open to reveal other worlds bleeding through. If we do nothing, Sarah whispered. Another shift showed them both in the confluence chamber. Connected to the network of consciousness, their forms partially translucent, as if existing in multiple states simultaneously. They appeared neither happy nor sad, simply purposeful, part of something vast beyond individual concerns. If we accept our roles fully, Sarah explained. The mirror shifted once more. This time, it showed them back in their cabin, older but together, changed in subtle ways. A faint glow visible around their forms, root-like patterns occasionally manifesting beneath their skin. Around them, the forest appeared stable but somehow more vibrant, as if they maintained a connection to the realm below even while living above. The third path, Sarah said softly. Not abandonment of duty, but transformation. Becoming guardians who walk between worlds rather than remaining anchored below. Daniel touched the mirror's surface gently. Is this truly possible? The caretaker believes so. No collected ones have attempted it before, but none have had your particular dual nature. She met his eyes. It would mean remaining connected to this place, Daniel. Periodically returning to maintain the boundaries. Never fully belonging to either world again. But together, Daniel said. Together, she confirmed. The mirror's surface stilled, settling on this third possibility. Their transformed existence balancing between worlds. The image conveyed both the weight and the wonder of such a life. They left the crystal structure in silence, each contemplating the visions. The convergence device awaited them, still humming with potential energy, its components aligned but not yet activated. The choice must be conscious, came the caretaker's voice as it approached. Freely given. Daniel studied the ancient entity with new understanding. If we choose this third path, becoming guardians who live above but maintain connection here, what guarantee do we have that it's possible? No guarantees exist across realities, the caretaker replied. Only probabilities. But your unique nature makes this path more possible for you than any who came before. Sarah turned to Daniel. Whatever we decide together. Daniel took a deep breath. 15 years of searching, of grief, of determination culminating in this moment of choice. He thought of Eli, safely returned above. Of Elder Thomas, who had understood more than he revealed. Of the forest that had been his home and sanctuary, "We'll do it," he said finally. "Become these guardians, these bridges. But we'll live our lives above together." The caretaker inclined its head in what might have been respect. "Then let us begin the convergence." It led them back to the chamber, where the convergence device pulsed with increasing energy. The collected began to gather, their root necklaces glowing in anticipation. 7 cycles complete, the caretaker intoned. The bridge forms. The boundaries strengthen. Daniel and Sarah stood before the device, hands clasped. Whatever came next would transform them irrevocably. "I found you," Daniel whispered to Sarah. "After all this time, I finally found you." "And I waited," she replied, "knowing somehow you would come." Together, they reached for the convergence device as it flared with blinding light.